Most women spend their lives waiting for someone to see them, to validate them, to finally say, "You are enough." They wait with silent ache in their chests, holding their breath through years of self-abandonment, hoping that love, real love, might arrive and save them from the truth they already know, but fear to speak. No one is coming. No one will ever love you the way you're meant to love yourself. And so the rare woman who stops waiting, who stands, who turns, not in anger but in resolve, becomes something altogether different. She does not explode. She does not plead. She simply walks away and never looks back. This woman is not hardened. She is not cruel. But she is done. Done performing softness to appease fragility. Done shrinking to preserve illusions. Done bargaining with a mirror that only reflects who others wish her to be. She has outgrown the room built by someone else's insecurities. Her silence, once misunderstood as compliance, now becomes the language of power. And when she walks, the earth remembers her steps, not because they're loud, but because they're certain. The world is not used to this kind of woman. She terrifies those who benefit from her confusion. Those who mistake submission for grace cannot comprehend her peace. You might think she must be bitter to detach so fully, but you would be wrong. Bitterness is the flavor of regret. She has none. Regret requires attachment to an outcome that never belonged to her to begin with. You see, the woman who walks away with no regret has already died 1,000 deaths in silence. The death of being unseen, the death of swallowing her words, the death of pretending to be less intelligent, less intuitive, less divine. She has buried parts of herself just to make others feel taller, stronger, more in control. And every time she bent, she heard the cracking inside her soul. But now, she hears something else, the call of her own becoming. It's not that she doesn't feel pain, she does. But pain is no longer her captor. It is her compass. It tells her where the wound is still bleeding. It tells her where the work must be done. She listens, she heals, and then she leaves. The Stoics said that freedom is the only worthy goal. Not comfort, not reputation, not even happiness. Freedom. And she has learned, often through betrayal, abandonment, and disillusionment, that freedom begins the moment she stops asking for permission to exist. She does not need closure. She is the closure. She does not crave apologies. Her peace no longer depends on someone else's remorse. Have you ever watched a woman reclaim her narrative? It's not dramatic. It's quiet, still, sacred, like the tide receding just before a wave, like the soft click of a door closing for the last time. She doesn't announce it. She just chooses herself. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, by integrating the light and the shadow. This woman has looked into her shadow and made peace with what she found there, the part of her that loved too deeply, the part of her that tolerated too much, the part that doubted her own intuition just to keep the peace. She does not shame these pieces anymore. They were teachers. They taught her where her boundaries must now be carved in stone. And you, yes, you watching. How many times have you betrayed your own knowing just to be chosen? How often have you made yourself digestible so someone else could avoid the discomfort of facing their own inadequacy? That ends now. Because the woman who walks away with no regret is not just a story. She is an invitation. She is proof that your worth is not tied to who stays, but to who you become when you finally stop begging for crumbs and build your own table. She is not a ghost of who she once was. She is the fire that remains after the burning, the essence that can never be taken again. Not because she's invulnerable, but because she finally understands. Her value was never negotiable. There is a moment, a precise and harrowing threshold, when a woman realizes that the silence she once feared is far more merciful than the noise of staying. It is not a moment filled with rage or righteousness, but with clarity so stark it feels like thunder beneath the skin. No one else sees it because it happens deep within, in the quiet chambers of her psyche, where truth has been whispering all along, waiting for her to listen. She is not walking away from a man or a relationship or even a life. She is walking away from the delusion that she must be broken to be loved, that she must contort into whatever shape others require to feel whole. She is leaving behind the version of herself who once believed that endurance was the same as strength, that loyalty meant erasure, that to be wanted, she had to be less. It is a sacred disobedience to choose self over story, to say no more, not in defiance, but in return to alignment. She no longer plays the roles assigned by trauma, no longer echoes the patterns inherited from generations of silenced women. This is not rebellion. It is remembrance. A remembering of her own name, her own power, her own soul, long before the world taught her to forget. She has stared down the mask of the false self, the pleasing self, the agreeable self, the endlessly giving self, and said, I see you, but I no longer need you. The ego flails. It tries to seduce her back into codependency with the promise of validation, but she has tasted something deeper. Solitude that sings, solitude that strengthens, solitude that doesn't apologize. There is no fury in her departure. Fury is for those who still want something in return. She wants nothing. Her leaving is not an act of punishment. It is an act of completion. The cycle is closed, the lesson learned. She carries no resentment, only reverence for the self that survived long enough to rise. And rise she does, not with fanfare, but with precision. Each step forward slices through illusion, each breath a reclaiming. She no longer fears being misunderstood. She understands herself. That is enough. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." She has realized this, not as a concept, but as a lived truth, carved from the bone of suffering. She no longer tries to control what others feel about her. Their perception is their burden, not hers. The need to be liked, accepted, approved of. It crumbles. In its place grows something unshakable: self-respect. Many will not understand her evolution. They will call her cold, difficult, arrogant. But their discomfort is not her concern. That too she has released. For she knows, the more a woman honors her worth, the more she is condemned by those who profited from her doubt. She does not seek revenge. She does not rehash the past. That would tether her back to what she's already transcended. Instead, she lets the silence speak. The same silence that once imprisoned her now becomes the vessel through which she commands her life. You, watching, feeling the tremble in your chest as this resonates, know this: the call you feel is real. It is the shadow you've repressed, begging to be held. The truth you've buried, demanding to be unearthed. You are not too much. You are not too sensitive. You are not asking for the impossible. You are simply ready to stop abandoning yourself for a seat at a table that was never built for you. Do not rush this awakening. It is not a performance. It is a process. Every tear, every disappointment, every goodbye has carved the path beneath your feet. Trust it. Walk it. And know that leaving is not the hard part. Staying in places that diminish you, that is the true violence. The woman who walks away with no regret does not pretend to be healed. She heals by refusing to participate in her own diminishment. She does not chase redemption. She becomes it. She does not collapse into loneliness. She cultivates solitude until it becomes her sanctuary. And in time, the world bends to her vibration, not because she demands it, but because she no longer settles for anything less. She is not alone. She is whole. And that is the most radical thing a woman can be in a world built on her fragmentation. She no longer waits for someone to mirror her worth. She has shattered the mirror. What once reflected back a fractured image, pieced together from others' needs and projections, now lies in shards, silent witnesses to a life unlived. And in their place, she finds a new kind of reflection, the stillness within, a mirror not of glass, but of soul. And it does not flatter, it does not deceive. It tells the truth with the kind of brutal mercy only the awakened can endure. In that truth, she sees the lineage of women behind her, mothers, grandmothers, forgotten ancestors, who were told to endure, to forgive too quickly, to fold themselves into palatable shapes. She sees the generational exhaustion, the invisible weight they bore in silence, and she feels it in her own marrow. But she does not inherit their silence. She breaks it, not by shouting, but by being, wholly, unapologetically. In her refusal to abandon herself, she becomes a new archetype, the woman who returns home to her soul, even if she must walk alone. Jung understood this path. He called it the journey through the unconscious, the integration of the shadow. She has walked through that underworld, not with a torch, but with hands outstretched, feeling her way through darkness others feared to name. And there, in the abyss, she found not demons, but discarded parts of herself. The wild girl, the angry one, the lover, the visionary. Parts deemed inconvenient, unruly, unfeminine. She picked them up, dusted them off, and welcomed them home. No part of her is exile now. To the world, she may appear solitary, but within her, there is a congregation, a chorus of reclaimed selves singing the song of wholeness. She does not need a witness to validate her becoming. She is the witness. She watches her own rebirth with reverence. No applause, no accolades, just the sacred knowing that this radical return is enough. Men, too, sense her shift. Some are drawn to her like moths to flame, intoxicated by her clarity, but unequipped to stand in its light. Others retreat, unsettled by what they cannot control. She does not flinch. Their reactions are no longer her mirror. Her worth is not contingent on their comprehension. She is not cruel, only clear. And that clarity is a boundary, a temple, a law unto itself. Those who come near her must come correct, not with masks, not with half-truths or wounded egos masquerading as strength, but with the raw humility of presence. She will meet them there, if they dare. But she will not wait. She has learned to dance alone, to hold her own hand through storms, to be the lover she once begged others to become. It is not easy. There are nights when the silence howls, when the temptation to go back, to explain, to make just one more person understand, becomes almost unbearable. But she doesn't. Because she knows, if she returns to who she was, not to who she is becoming. And that price is too high. She has buried too many versions of herself already. This one will live. Seneca once said, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." Her life now is an act of daily courage, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet refusals, the unread messages, the invitations declined, the spaces she no longer enters, the gaze she holds without shrinking, the words she chooses not to speak because she no longer needs to prove anything. This is not detachment. It is devotion. Devotion to truth, to alignment, to inner peace that cannot be bought, borrowed, or bargained for. And in that devotion, she finds something unexpected: joy. Not the fleeting joy of validation or romance, but the deep, enduring joy of self-possession. She belongs to herself now, and it shows. You too are capable of this, of drawing a line not in sand, but in stone. Of saying, "This is where I end and you begin," without guilt, without explanation. Of leaving not to hurt, but to heal. Of walking away not in defiance, but in devotion to your highest self. She is not superhuman. She is not beyond reach. She is simply a woman who chose to rise rather than remain. And every step she takes leaves behind a map, an invisible trail carved through fire and shadow, waiting for you to follow when you are ready. There is a kind of strength that does not roar. It does not announce itself with declarations or defiance. It simply is, steady, grounded, immovable. This is the strength of the woman who has walked through her own fire and emerged without needing anyone to carry her out. Not because she lacked the need, but because no one came. And in their absence, she discovered something unshakable, that what she thought would destroy her only revealed her. She does not wear her pain like armor. She does not parade her scars for sympathy. Her healing is not a performance, it is a private revolution. And in that stillness, away from the noise of validation and the echo of old roles, she became fluent in the language of self-respect. It is not loud, it is not aggressive, but it is final. Gone is the woman who needed to be chosen to feel worthy. Gone is the girl who apologized for her voice, her anger, her longing. What remains is a presence, elegant in its restraint, luminous in its truth. She no longer enters rooms hoping to be liked. She walks in to see if the room is worthy of her. There was a time when she tolerated the half-loves and false promises, when she mistook potential for reality and crumbs for feasts, when she rationalized red flags because her own heart was too loyal to let go. But now she understands. Potential is not enough. She no longer gambles her peace on what could be. She trusts what is. And if what is does not honor her, she does not beg. She does not bend. She bows out. To some, she may appear cold, but it is not coldness. It is clarity. Clarity gained through years of emotional labor, unreciprocated nurturing, and spiritual depletion. She no longer confuses overfunctioning with love. She no longer feels responsible for fixing what others refuse to face. And she no longer needs to rescue anyone from the consequences of their own avoidance. Epictetus once wrote, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." This woman has learned the cost of chasing things outside of herself: affection, approval, redemption, and she no longer pays it. Her soul is no longer for sale. She has made peace with not being understood, with being the villain in someone else's story, with walking away without a dramatic exit, a final word, or a public explanation. That peace was not given. It was earned through sleepless nights, internal wars, and the relentless work of choosing herself when it would have been easier to disappear. She sees now that love is not proven through sacrifice, that being chosen means nothing if she must betray herself to be chosen, that staying quiet, small, agreeable, these are not virtues, they are veils, and she has torn them down, one by one, until what remains is unfiltered, unmasked, unmovable truth. The beauty of her resolve is that it is not dependent on circumstances. It is not reactive. It is rooted. She does not waver when met with disapproval. She does not unravel when someone withdraws love, because her love, her deepest, fiercest, most sacred love, is no longer outsourced. It is inward, rooted in the soil of her own becoming. And you, do you feel it rising in you? The quiet whisper that says, enough. The sacred pulse that says, now, this is your call, not to anger, but to sovereignty, not to isolation, but to self-possession. The path is not easy, but the moment you stop performing, stop negotiating your value, stop seeking someone else's permission to be whole, that is the moment everything changes. She is not bitter. She is not numb. She feels everything, but no longer lets those feelings define her worth. She is not driven by fear, nor shackled by longing. She walks, not because she wants to leave, but because staying would mean abandoning the woman she has fought so hard to become. And when she leaves, she does not slam the door. She does not throw stones. She does not curse what was. She simply turns, shoulders steady, eyes forward, and walks. The silence she leaves behind is not emptiness. It is the echo of boundaries finally held, of truth finally lived, of a soul finally free. Some will say she changed, that she became distant, detached, unrecognizable, and they will be right, but not in the way they think. She did change. She outgrew the space where her voice was silenced. She outlived the roles that required her to abandon herself. She dismantled the illusions that kept her seeking love in places where only control was offered. What they fail to see is that this change was not an escape. It was a resurrection. In every woman who walks away without regret, there is a funeral no one attends, a quiet burial of identities worn thin from years of performing. The martyr, the pleaser, the savior, the soft echo of a girl who made herself small just to keep someone else comfortable. She lays these roles to rest, not with anger, but with reverence. They served their purpose, but they are no longer needed in the temple she is now building within herself. She understands now what so few dare to say aloud: that love, true love, cannot exist without freedom. And freedom begins when you stop asking others for the permission to exist as you are. She no longer fears rejection because she no longer negotiates belonging. Belonging, to her, is no longer a place. It is a presence. It is wherever she is fully herself. The Stoics taught that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, that the mind creates prisons far worse than any external circumstance. She knows this intimately. She has lived within those mental confines, imagining what she did wrong, how she could have been better, quieter, prettier, easier to love. But she also knows now that those were never her burdens. They were projections of other people's inadequacy, projected onto her like shadows cast on a wall. And now, she no longer chases the light. She becomes it. The woman who walks away with no regret is not heartless. Her heart has simply healed with new laws. She no longer bleeds for those who refuse to see their own wounds. She does not throw herself into the fire to keep others warm. She knows now that self-sacrifice is not proof of love. It is often a disguise for self-abandonment. And you, watching, how many times have you done the same? How many times have you said yes when every cell in your body screamed no? How many times have you molded yourself into something digestible only to be left empty, hollowed out by the effort of constantly proving your worth? She is done proving, done performing. She chooses peace over performance now, integrity over approval, solitude over half-love. There is something unspeakably beautiful about a woman who knows her own depth, who no longer needs to be understood to feel valid, who no longer seeks to explain her worth in the currency of someone else's comprehension. She speaks less, but her silence is thunder. She moves slower, but with such intention that the world seems to pause when she enters a room, and she knows deeply that not everyone will meet her there, that many will be too consumed by their own unresolved wounds to stand beside a woman who is no longer bleeding. But that does not stop her. She does not wait to be joined. She leads. She walks ahead, not to escape, but to become. And she trusts that those who are meant for her path will find the courage to rise and walk beside her, not because she pleaded, but because her presence called something ancient alive in them. She is not lonely. She is discerning. Not bitter, boundaried, not distant, sovereign. These are the sacred costs of liberation, and she pays them willingly because she knows the alternative, a lifetime of shrinking, aching, and quietly dying beneath the weight of someone else's comfort. The day she walked away, the sky did not change, the earth did not shake, but something in the invisible fabric of her reality was altered forever. The chains were not physical, yet their snapping echoed like thunder across the psyche. She had chosen herself, and the universe took note. This is not a fairy tale. This is a reckoning. This is what it means to reclaim the narrative, to live not in reaction, but in creation, to be the author of your own becoming. And every step she takes is a line written in fire and truth. The world often mistakes her absence for weakness, as if her withdrawal from chaos meant she could not endure it. But what they do not understand, what they cannot understand, is that she left, not because she was fragile, but because she had become too strong to remain. The woman who walks away with no regret does not flee. She chooses, and in that choice, she transcends every narrative that ever tried to confine her. She has learned to sit with her own silence, to hear the still voice within that once whispered, but now thunders, "You are enough." Not because someone told her so, not because she achieved, performed, or proved, but because she has finally remembered what the world spent decades trying to make her forget, her inherent worth. This remembering is not an event. It is a slow and aching peeling away of illusion. It comes in moments, small, sacred rebellions, saying no when you used to say yes, letting the call go unanswered, leaving the table when love is no longer being served. And it's in these moments, mundane yet miraculous, that she begins to taste her own power. Not the loud, blinding power of domination, but the deep, sacred power of self-honoring. She no longer trades her peace for proximity. She no longer sacrifices her center for someone's attention. She understands now that not all love is nourishing, that some love is born of wounds, wounds that seek not connection, but control. And she is no longer willing to be the balm for someone else's refusal to heal. Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine archetype in the unconscious male, often repressed or projected outward. She has lived as that projection, adored for her beauty, consumed for her softness, praised when she was pleasing, and punished when she was not. But she is no longer someone's symbol. She is sovereign. She no longer dances in someone else's dream. She awakens within her own. The men who once idolized her often retreat in confusion when she no longer plays the role. when she speaks truth without sugar, when she demands presence, not performance, when she ceases to be the mirror for their unexamined soul. They call her intimidating, difficult, hard to love. But what they mean is, she will not abandon herself for me, and she won't, not anymore. She has stared long into the abyss of her loneliness and found not despair, but wisdom. The kind of wisdom that only comes when you no longer run from yourself. She has danced with her own darkness, made art from her grief, and built a sanctuary where others built prisons. In solitude, she met her true self, not the curated version, but the wild one, the one who remembers the sound of her own name in the wind. She moves now with a new rhythm, a rhythm that is not dictated by fear or desire, but by alignment. Every decision is a litmus test. Does this honor my truth, or does it betray it? And if it betrays, she lets it go. Not with rage, not with bitterness, but with a quiet grace that terrifies those still clinging to illusion. She no longer explains. She no longer justifies. She no longer performs emotional labor for those unwilling to meet her in depth. Her presence is a filter. It reveals, it tests, it purifies, and only those who have done their own shadow work can stand beside her without collapsing into ego. You who are watching, sensing the stirrings of your own becoming, know this: there will be grief. The path to liberation is littered with the remnants of who you used to be. You will miss the comfort of the familiar, even when it suffocated you. You will ache for the connection, even when it cost you your soul. But do not turn back. Do not forget what it took to arrive at the edge of yourself. There, on that edge, is where you become real. She has not forgotten her past. She simply no longer lives there. Her life is a forward-facing act of faith, a living poem to the power of choosing self over survival. She is not seeking revenge. She is not seeking closure. She is seeking only what is true. And if the truth leads her away from what once felt like home, so be it. Her soul has built a new one where she no longer has to beg to belong. The woman who walks away with no regret does not ask for your understanding. She asks for nothing, because she has finally given herself everything. And when the world comes knocking, offering apologies, explanations, pleas laced with too late revelations, she does not answer with cruelty. She answers with distance. For once a woman has seen herself clearly, once she has tasted the marrow of her own truth, she cannot be lured back into the smallness of who she pretended to be. Not for love, not for comfort, not even for closure. She is the closure. This kind of detachment is not cold, it is sacred. It is the act of honoring herself so completely that even nostalgia cannot seduce her. The past, after all, is not a home. It is a graveyard, and she has buried enough versions of herself there already. There was a time when she would have accepted the bare minimum, when she would have called it fate, or timing, or trying her best. But now, her standards are not rooted in perfection. They are rooted in self-regard. She no longer begs for breadcrumbs when she knows she was made for the feast. And she would rather dine alone in silence than sit at a table where her worth is up for debate. The Stoics would admire her stillness, her quiet discipline, her refusal to be governed by fleeting emotions or external drama. She does not react anymore. She responds, if at all. She does not chase clarity from those who speak in riddles. She does not lean into chaos in hopes of finding intimacy there. She understands that peace is not passive. It is a boundary. And she guards it like her life depends on it, because it does. To be a woman who walks away without regret is to be a woman who has reclaimed her instinct. Her body no longer flinches when the mask drops. Her intuition no longer whispers, it commands. She is no longer available for false promises wrapped in charisma. She has learned that presence is not in the performance of affection, but in the consistency of truth. She sees now with ruthless clarity who shows up in truth and who only shows up when they're afraid to lose her. This discernment is not cynicism, it is wisdom earned through the brutal alchemy of heartbreak and healing. And now she moves differently, more slowly, more consciously. She listens not only to words, but to energy. She watches not only what people say, but who they become when they don't get their way. Those who once manipulated her with silence, with praise, with guilt, now find themselves staring into an unmovable mirror. She does not engage. She does not argue. She does not teach those who refuse to learn. Her silence is not absence. It is a sermon. And you? Do you feel the pull to do the same? To step out of the roles you never agreed to play? To stop negotiating your softness just to soothe someone else's sharp edges? Let her story be your reflection. Let it be your invitation to remember that you are not here to be consumed. You are here to live fully, fiercely, and without apology. Her walk away was not loud, but it was seismic, because it was not about them. It was about her, about what she was no longer willing to accept, about the parts of herself she was no longer willing to betray, about the life she was finally ready to live without the weight of waiting for someone else to choose her. She chooses herself now, again and again, in the quiet hours of mourning, in the silent ache of letting go, in the sacred decision to be her own sanctuary. And though the world may never celebrate this kind of choice, she knows it is the most radical thing she has ever done. Those who remain will not do so by accident. They will not have stumbled into her life through charm or timing. They will be those who see her, who meet her in the depths, who honor her truth, not because they want her, but because they respect her. These are the rare few who can love a woman who does not need to be saved, who can hold space without needing to control it, who can walk beside her without needing to be the reason she walks at all. And so she walks, not to escape, but to expand, not to abandon, but to return. And with each step, she gathers herself back into wholeness, no longer torn between who she is and who she was asked to be. She is no longer split, no longer silenced, no longer shackled by the invisible contract of keeping others comfortable at her own expense. She is free. There is a final shedding that happens, not in a moment, but over time. A quiet disintegration of what once clung to her skin, like smoke from an old fire. Expectations, labels, the echoes of gaslit doubt. They fall away like brittle leaves in the wind, and she does not gather them. She lets them go. Because the woman who walks away with no regret no longer mistakes decay for something worth saving. What's left is not a hardened shell, but a softened core. Not weakness, but tenderness reclaimed from years of weaponized vulnerability. She does not fear her softness anymore. She simply no longer offers it to those who treat it like a currency they can spend and discard. Her softness is sacred now. It is not for the unready. It is not for the unworthy. It is for her. And for those rare few who understand how to hold it with reverence. She does not look back, not because the past wasn't beautiful, but because she knows beauty alone is not enough. Love that asks you to abandon yourself is not love. Beauty that comes at the cost of your peace is not worth beholding. And comfort that keeps you stagnant is not a gift. It is a gilded cage. This is where she arrives, not at a destination, but at a knowing. The deep, visceral knowing that nothing outside her can define her. Not a relationship, not a title, not a story written by someone else's pen. She is the author now. The ink is her breath. The page is her life. And she writes not to impress, but to live in alignment with what is real. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." She lives by this law. She speaks with precision, loves with presence, walks with awareness. Her life is not rushed. It is ritual. Every decision a consecration, every boundary a benediction. And the irony is this: though she walks alone, she is more connected than ever. Not to people who drain her, but to something older, deeper, eternal. Call it intuition. Call it spirit. Call it the untamed voice of her own soul. It sings to her now, not in metaphor, but in motion. It guides her with a quiet certainty that no longer seeks consensus. You, too, know that voice. You've heard it in the quiet hours, when no one was watching, when the mask slipped and the ache returned. That voice that whispers, "You were never meant to live this small." That voice is not a threat to your life. It is your life, waiting to be reclaimed. She is not angry that they could not love her. She is grateful that their inability revealed where she still abandoned herself. What once felt like betrayal now feels like liberation. The lies made truth more visible. The rejection made self-acceptance non-negotiable. The ending was not the loss, it was the opening. And when they look at her now, when they realize they can no longer reach her, no longer summon the version of her who needed them to see her, they will say she is unreachable. They will call her aloof, too much, or worse, selfish. But what they mean is that she has evolved beyond their access. And that is not arrogance, that is elevation. She does not need to be forgiven. She has forgiven herself for staying too long, for giving too much, for thinking she had to earn love that should have been offered freely. That forgiveness was not a moment, it was a metamorphosis. And now, she walks with wings, invisible to the eye, but undeniable in energy. She is no longer chasing safety in others. She has become the safe space. She is no longer searching for home. She is the home. And the woman who becomes her own sanctuary cannot be exiled from herself again. She no longer asks, will they come back? Will they regret? She asks only, does this nourish my soul? And if it does not, she leaves. Quietly, clearly, completely.